A dream denied. Elijah Thompson stood at the entrance of Ironwood Ridge Country Club, one of the most exclusive establishments in the state. He had worked for years to build his financial empire, a sprawling real estate and investment firm, offering opportunities to those society often overlooked. His success had come with much sacrifice, sleepless nights, and tireless perseverance, but none of that mattered today. Today was the culmination of everything he had worked for, a moment to celebrate what he'd achieved. His reflection in the gleaming glass doors showed a confident man in his mid-30s, dressed sharply in a custom-tailored navy suit, his chocolate-brown skin contrasting with the crisp white of his shirt. He adjusted his tie, taking a deep breath before pushing the door open. The grand entrance greeted him with the familiar scent of polished wood and the faint aroma of expensive cologne. Elijah had been in many prestigious rooms, but this one held particular significance. Ironwood Ridge was more than just a country club. It symbolized access to a world he had long been denied. Growing up in a lower-income neighborhood, Elijah had always been aware that certain doors were closed to people like him. But things were different now. He had made a name for himself in business. His company was listed among the top in the region, and his wealth allowed him to enjoy luxuries his younger self could never have imagined. Joining Ironwood Ridge would be the final affirmation that he had made it, that he had truly arrived. As he approached the front desk, a smartly dressed receptionist greeted him with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I assist you today?" she asked, her eyes taking in his appearance with polite curiosity. "Good afternoon," Elijah responded warmly. "I have an appointment with Mr. Hastings regarding my membership application." The receptionist's smile faltered for just a moment before she quickly regained her composure. "Of course, Mr. Thompson," she said, typing into her computer. "Mr. Hastings is expecting you. Please have a seat, and I'll let him know you've arrived." Elijah nodded and moved toward the waiting area. As he sat on one of the plush leather chairs, his thoughts drifted back to his childhood in the small apartment where his mother had worked tirelessly as a seamstress to make ends meet. His father, a man of few words, had instilled in him the value of hard work and integrity. Despite their modest circumstances, his parents had always encouraged Elijah to dream big. "Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do," his mother used to say. Those words had carried him through countless rejections and obstacles. Now, sitting in the pristine waiting room of a club that had always been out of reach, Elijah felt a surge of pride. He had done what many said was impossible. He had succeeded against the odds. And now he was here. Ironwood Ridge would not only offer him a prestigious network of influential business people, but it would also be a symbol of everything he had overcome. A few minutes later, a tall man with silver hair and a sharp suit emerged from one of the offices. His presence commanded the room, and Elijah recognized him instantly. Richard Hastings, the club president. "Mr. Thompson," Hastings greeted him, extending a hand with a firm smile. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Hastings," Elijah responded, shaking his hand. There was a mutual respect in their exchange, but there was also an undercurrent of tension that Elijah couldn't quite place. "Please follow me to my office," Hastings said, leading Elijah down a long hallway lined with framed photos of club members, most of them middle-aged white men, posing in front of golf courses or during grand events. Elijah couldn't help but notice that there were very few faces like his. He pushed the thought aside, reminding himself that this was just another barrier to break through. As they entered Hastings' spacious office, Elijah felt the weight of the moment. The office was decorated with dark mahogany furniture, framed awards, and accolades. Hastings sat behind an imposing desk, and Elijah took a seat across from him, feeling the eyes of the portraits on the wall watching him. "First of all, congratulations on your achievements," Hastings began, flipping through a file in front of him. "Your name has come up frequently in business circles, and I've been impressed by what I've heard." "Thank you," Elijah said, his tone measured. He had learned long ago to be cautious with compliments in these settings. Hastings leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he studied Elijah. "We don't often have someone as young as you applying for membership," he said. "Ironwood Ridge is a place steeped in tradition. Our members are handpicked, and we pride ourselves on maintaining certain standards." Elijah stiffened slightly. He had heard this type of talk before, the kind that was meant to be polite, but hinted at something deeper. "I understand," he said carefully. "I believe my experience and contributions to the community make me a good fit for the club." Hastings smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No doubt about your success, Mr. Thompson. But Ironwood Ridge is more than just about business. It's about culture, a shared history. We're very selective about who we admit, and we've reached capacity for new memberships at this time." Elijah felt his heart sink, but he kept his expression neutral. He had anticipated this possibility, though it still stung to hear the words. "Capacity," he repeated. "I was under the impression there were still openings for new members." "There's always a waiting list," Hastings said smoothly. "And well, some candidates may find that other clubs better suit their preferences." The implication hung heavy in the air. Elijah clenched his jaw, feeling the familiar heat of anger rise in his chest, but he swallowed it down. "I see," he said evenly. "Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Hastings." Hastings nodded, a faint smile of triumph playing on his lips. "I'll keep your application on file, Mr. Thompson. Who knows? Things may change in the future." Elijah stood, extending his hand once more. "I appreciate that," he said, though his voice lacked the warmth it had held earlier. As he walked out of the office, Elijah felt the weight of history pressing down on him, the history of men like Hastings, of institutions like Ironwood Ridge, who had always found subtle ways to remind him that no matter how successful he became, he would never truly belong in their world. By the time he reached his car, Elijah's hands were shaking. He sat behind the wheel, staring at the grand facade of the club, and let the emotions he had been holding back wash over him. He had been rejected before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about membership. It was about the reminder that in the eyes of some, he would never be enough. But Elijah had faced rejection before. He had been told no more times than he could count. And each time, he had used it as fuel to push harder, to climb higher. He wasn't about to stop now. As he drove away from Ironwood Ridge, Elijah's mind was already racing with possibilities. He didn't need their approval. In fact, he would build something even better, a place where people like him could truly belong. Ironwood Ridge might have closed its doors to him, but Elijah knew that when one door closed, another one always opened. And this time, he would be the one building it. A seed of transformation. The evening sun dipped below the skyline as Elijah pulled into the driveway of his modern, minimalist home. Its sleek glass facade reflected the colors of the sunset, but for once, the beauty of the scene did little to ease the weight on his chest. He stepped out of his car, his mind replaying the rejection at Ironwood Ridge over and over. The ache wasn't just personal, it was generational. Elijah had felt the same sting his ancestors had felt, men and women who had struggled against systems designed to keep them in their place. But this time, it was his turn to face it. He could almost hear his mother's voice whispering, "Don't let this stop you." That simple phrase had pushed him through countless sleepless nights as a young entrepreneur, navigating the turbulent world of business. Elijah entered his house, where silence greeted him. His success had brought him material wealth. This sprawling house with floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive art on the walls, and luxurious furnishings, but none of it meant much at the moment. He kicked off his shoes and walked toward the living room, passing the gallery wall that chronicled his rise from obscurity to prominence. Photos of awards, magazine covers, and candid moments with influential figures lined the space, each image a testament to how far he had come. One photo in particular caught his eye. It was of him and his parents, taken at his college graduation. His mother, wearing a simple dress, beamed with pride, and his father, ever stoic, had a faint smile that Elijah knew had meant the world. He stared at the picture for a long moment, his chest tightening. Everything he did, every achievement, had been for them. But tonight, he felt the heavy burden of their dreams on his shoulders, their hopes weighing on him as he processed what had happened at the club. Elijah sat down on the leather couch and picked up his phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing a number. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Elijah, good to hear from you. What's going on?" It was his old friend Marcus, someone Elijah had grown up with. They had both come from the same tough neighborhood, but their paths had diverged. While Elijah had pursued business, Marcus had become a community leader and activist, dedicated to fighting for justice and equity in their city. Despite their different fields, the two remained close, bound by their shared history and the values instilled in them by their families. "Marcus, I need to talk," Elijah said, running a hand over his face. "I'm here. What's up?" Elijah paused, unsure how to even start. "You know I applied for membership at Ironwood Ridge, right?" Marcus was silent for a moment. "Yeah, I remember. You were excited about it. How'd it go?" Elijah let out a bitter laugh. "They turned me down. Said they were at capacity, but we both know that's not the real reason." Marcus sighed on the other end. "I'm sorry, man. I was hoping that place had changed, but I guess some things are still the same." "Yeah," Elijah said quietly. "It's frustrating. I've worked so hard to get to where I am, and yet, it feels like no matter what I do, I'll never be enough for people like them." Marcus's voice softened. "You're more than enough, Elijah. Don't let them define your worth. You've built an empire. That's something they can never take from you." Elijah appreciated Marcus's words, but it didn't ease the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "I know. I don't want to let this go. I'm tired of places like Ironwood Ridge, deciding who's worthy and who isn't. I want to do something." There was a pause on the other end. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked cautiously. Elijah stood up, pacing the room. "I don't know yet, but I want to create something. Something that goes beyond just me. I want to build a place where people like us, people who've been told no their whole lives, can finally say yes to themselves. A space that welcomes everyone, regardless of where they come from or what they look like." Marcus's tone shifted, intrigued. "That's a bold vision, Elijah. You're talking about something much bigger than just a club." "I know," Elijah said, feeling the fire inside him start to burn brighter. "But it's needed. Ironwood Ridge and places like it. They're relics of a past that's holding us back. I want to create something new, something that reflects the future we should be building." There was a moment of silence, and then Marcus spoke, his voice full of conviction. "I think you're onto something. But you need to be strategic. You can't just create another version of what already exists. You've got to build something transformative, something that speaks to the community in ways that clubs like Ironwood Ridge never could." Elijah stopped pacing and stared out the window, watching as the last light of the day faded into dusk. Marcus was right. This had to be more than just a reaction to his rejection. It had to be a movement, a space that celebrated diversity, unity, and progress. A place where no one had to prove their worth to be included. "You're right," Elijah said slowly. "I'm not just building a club. I'm building a legacy." The next morning, Elijah woke with a renewed sense of purpose. He sat at his desk, pulling out a blank notebook, and began sketching out ideas. He envisioned a space that wasn't just a country club, but a hub for innovation, culture, and community. A place where entrepreneurs, artists, activists, and leaders from all walks of life could gather, exchange ideas, and uplift one another. He thought about the location. It couldn't be in a secluded, exclusive part of town like Ironwood Ridge. It had to be in the heart of the city, accessible to everyone. A space with state-of-the-art facilities. Golf, tennis, swimming, but also art studios, co-working spaces, lecture halls, and performance venues. It would be a place where the next generation of leaders could be mentored, where ideas could flourish, and where no one had to worry about being judged for the color of their skin or their background. As he wrote, ideas flowed faster than he could keep up. He imagined a membership model that wasn't based solely on wealth, but on contribution to the community. He envisioned partnerships with local schools, offering scholarships and internships to underprivileged youth. It would be a place of learning, growth, and connection, a symbol of what the future could look like. He would name it Elysian Heights, inspired by the Greek concept of Elysium, a place where the worthy and heroic could finally find peace. But unlike the mythical realm, this Elysian Heights would be open to all, a modern utopia where people from all backgrounds could find a sense of belonging and purpose. Elijah worked for hours, his ideas becoming more detailed with each passing minute. He researched architects who specialized in sustainable, inclusive designs. He reached out to potential investors, pitching the concept with the same passion that had driven him to build his company from the ground up. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People were ready for change. They were ready for something new. As the days turned into weeks, Elijah's vision began to take shape. He secured a plot of land in a vibrant, diverse part of the city. He hired a team of architects, designers, and planners who shared his passion for creating a space that was not just a club but a community. And slowly, brick by brick, Elysian Heights began to rise. But as the project gained momentum, word began to spread, reaching the ears of Ironwood Ridge and those who had once turned him away. At Ironwood Ridge, the atmosphere had changed. Membership was down, and the club, once a symbol of prestige and tradition, was now seen by many as outdated and exclusionary. Gerald Hastings sat in his office, frowning at the latest financial reports. The numbers were alarming. More and more members were leaving, and whispers of discontent were growing louder. People are talking about some new club, one board member had mentioned at a recent meeting. It's different from anything we've seen before. Inclusive, diverse, and from what I've heard, it's attracting exactly the kind of young talent we've been struggling to bring in. Gerald had brushed it off at the time, but now, as he stared at the declining revenue charts, he couldn't ignore the possibility that Ironwood Ridge's days of dominance might be numbered. And then he heard the name. Elysian Heights, the project everyone was talking about, the club that was turning heads in every corner of the city, was being spearheaded by none other than Elijah Thompson, the very man Gerald had rejected just months before. Gerald felt a chill run down his spine. He had underestimated Elijah, and now, it seemed, he was about to learn just how costly that mistake would be. Meanwhile, Elijah stood at the construction site of Elysian Heights, watching as workers laid the foundation of what would soon be a monument to perseverance, vision, and change. He smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. Ironwood Ridge had denied him entry, but in doing so, they had unwittingly given him the push he needed to create something far greater. Elijah knew, without a doubt, that Elysian Heights would be everything Ironwood Ridge could never be. And soon, the world would see that too. Building bridges, breaking walls. Elysian Heights was no longer just a dream sketched out in a notebook. It was becoming a reality. Every day, Elijah watched the progress with a mixture of excitement and awe. The once empty plot of land now buzzed with activity. As construction workers laid the foundation, architects finalized blueprints, and designers put finishing touches on interior plans that would bring Elijah's vision to life. But while the physical space was taking shape, the heart of Elysian Heights, its mission and community, was still being built piece by piece. Elijah had always known that Elysian Heights would be more than just a country club. It had to be a place where people of all backgrounds could come together to create, learn, and grow. A place where barriers were broken and new paths were forged. For this to happen, the space had to reflect the diversity and inclusivity that defined its purpose. He had carefully selected his team of collaborators, designers, architects, and community leaders who shared his passion for progress. One of the most important members of this team was Carmen Rodriguez, a brilliant urban planner and architect who had made a name for herself by designing spaces that prioritized community engagement and social equity. Carmen had been one of Elijah's first hires, and she had quickly become his right hand in the project. Together, they had spent countless hours discussing everything from the layout of the building to the programs they wanted to offer. But more than that, they talked about the impact Elysian Heights would have on the community and beyond. "Elijah," Carmen said one afternoon as they walked through the construction site, hard hats perched on their heads, "we have a real opportunity here to set a new standard for what spaces like this can be. Elysian Heights isn't just another club. It's a movement. People are going to look to us for leadership, not just in terms of business, but in how we engage with and uplift the community." Elijah nodded, his gaze sweeping over the half-finished structures around them. "That's exactly what I want. This isn't just about creating a space for the elite or the wealthy. I want this to be a space where anyone with vision and drive can feel at home. A place where people who've been shut out of opportunities can finally have access to resources, mentorship, and support." Carmen smiled. "It's ambitious, but if anyone can make it happen, it's you." They continued their walk, stopping to speak with workers and check the progress of various parts of the project. Elijah was hands-on, making sure that everything from the design of the recreational areas to the art installations in the lobby reflected the values of inclusion and innovation. He wanted Elysian Heights to feel welcoming from the moment someone stepped through the door. After their rounds, they returned to the temporary office they'd set up on-site. Blueprints and design plans covered the large table in the center of the room, and Carmen unrolled a new set of sketches for Elijah to review. "These are the updated designs for the community spaces," she said, pointing to various sections of the plans. "We've added more collaborative work areas here and here, along with outdoor seating so people can gather in a more casual environment. We're also working on an indoor garden that will be visible from the main entrance, something to bring a sense of calm and connection with nature as soon as you walk in." Elijah studied the plans carefully. "This is perfect," he said, nodding his approval. "I want this place to feel open, like the walls aren't meant to separate people but to bring them together." Carmen grinned. "That's the goal." As the construction of Elysian Heights progressed, word about the project spread quickly. What had started as a quiet initiative was now the talk of the city. Media outlets began running stories about the new innovative space that promised to redefine what it meant to be a country club. Unlike the exclusive insular environments of Ironwood Ridge and others like it, Elysian Heights was being positioned as a symbol of inclusivity, modernity, and progress. But with this growing attention came curiosity and scrutiny. Ironwood Ridge, in particular, was feeling the heat. Members of the club had started whispering about Elysian Heights, wondering what it would mean for them. Some were intrigued, while others were resentful, dismissing it as a passing trend that would never stand the test of time. Gerald Hastings, however, was not one to underestimate Elijah Thompson anymore. He had seen the plans for Elysian Heights and knew that this was not a project that would fizzle out. It was a threat, one that could destabilize everything Ironwood Ridge stood for. In his office, Gerald sat with his board of directors, their faces etched with concern. "We can't ignore this any longer," said Robert Davis, one of the club's oldest members. "Elysian Heights is attracting a lot of attention, and it's not just because it's new. People are drawn to the values it represents. We've had several members already leave Ironwood Ridge to join this new club." "I know," Gerald said, his tone clipped. "But what do you propose we do? We can't suddenly change who we are. Ironwood Ridge is built on tradition, on history. If we start pandering to trends, we lose the very essence of what makes us exclusive." Robert sighed, glancing around the room at the other board members. "I'm not saying we change who we are, but we can't afford to be seen as outdated. There's a growing sentiment in the community that Ironwood Ridge is, well, let's just say we're being perceived as out of touch. People are looking for something different now, something that reflects where society is heading." Gerald's jaw clenched. He had spent his entire career upholding the traditions of Ironwood Ridge, maintaining its image as a bastion of exclusivity and prestige. The thought of changing its core values felt like a betrayal of everything he believed in. But the numbers didn't lie. Membership was declining, and Elysian Heights was poised to become the new standard. "We need to counter this somehow," Gerald said, his voice tight with frustration. "We can't let them steal our members without a fight." The boardroom fell silent, each member lost in thought. Finally, one of the younger board members, a woman named Sarah Ellington, spoke up. "Maybe instead of trying to compete directly with Elysian Heights, we should focus on reinforcing what makes us unique," she suggested. "There's still a market for tradition and exclusivity, but we need to adapt in a way that keeps us relevant. We don't have to copy them, but we do need to show that Ironwood Ridge is more than just a relic of the past." Gerald considered her words, though his pride made it difficult to fully embrace the idea. Still, he couldn't deny that something had to change. Ironwood Ridge was in trouble, and the longer they waited to act, the harder it would be to recover. "Fine," Gerald said at last, his tone begrudging. "We'll explore some options for modernization, but we do it without compromising the integrity of what this club stands for. We'll remind people why they came to Ironwood Ridge in the first place." But even as he spoke, Gerald knew it wouldn't be that simple. The winds of change were blowing, and Ironwood Ridge might not be able to withstand them. Back at Elysian Heights, Elijah and his team were celebrating another milestone: the completion of the first phase of construction. The main building, with its glass walls and open, airy design, now stood tall against the city skyline. Inside, the community spaces, fitness centers, and recreational areas were coming together, each reflecting the modern, inclusive ethos that Elijah had envisioned from the beginning. But there was still much work to be done. Elijah sat in his office one evening, reviewing plans for the next phase. He had decided that Elysian Heights would not just be a physical space, it would also serve as a platform for social change. He wanted to launch mentorship programs, business incubators, and educational initiatives that would directly benefit the local community. His vision extended far beyond the members who would join the club. It was about creating opportunities for people who had been left out of the conversation for far too long. As he worked, a notification popped up on his phone. It was a news article from one of the city's most respected publications, and the headline made him pause. "Elysian Heights, the future of country clubs, or a flash in the pan." Elijah clicked on the article, scanning the text. The piece was largely positive, praising Elysian Heights for its innovative design and inclusive mission. But there was an undercurrent of skepticism, with the writer questioning whether the club could sustain its momentum in the long run. Elijah's lips twitched into a smile. Let them doubt, he thought. He had faced doubters his entire life, and every time, he had proven them wrong. This would be no different. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about the road ahead. Elysian Heights was more than just a project. It was a symbol of everything he believed in. And no matter how much resistance he faced, he knew that this was just the beginning. The future was his to build. Meanwhile, as Ironwood Ridge scrambled to hold onto its crumbling facade of exclusivity, Elijah's vision continued to expand. He knew that Elysian Heights was more than just a response to rejection. It was a declaration that the old ways of doing things were over, and a new era was about to begin. And as the doors of Elysian Heights prepared to open, Elijah knew that the world would soon see the full power of what they had created. Ironwood Ridge was about to face a reckoning, one that no amount of tradition or history could protect them from. The tides of change. The grand opening of Elysian Heights was only weeks away, and the anticipation in the city was palpable. The once vacant lot that Elijah had turned into his dream project was now a stunning structure that stood as a beacon of change. It was more than just an exclusive club. It was a symbol of progress, inclusion, and innovation. The city buzzed with excitement, and Elijah was at the center of it all, steering the project toward its final stages. As he sat in his office one morning, his phone buzzed with notifications, reporters requesting interviews, event coordinators confirming details for the opening gala, and community leaders reaching out to congratulate him on his success. Elijah, ever the calm visionary, smiled as he scrolled through the messages. Elysian Heights wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had felt excluded, everyone who had been told they didn't belong. This was their place too. But while Elijah's vision was unfolding smoothly, not everyone in the city was celebrating his success. The old guard, the entrenched elites who had always controlled the city's social scene, were watching with increasing discomfort. And nowhere was that discomfort felt more acutely than at Ironwood Ridge. Gerald Hastings had spent the last few months pretending that Elysian Heights wasn't a threat. To his board, to his members, to anyone who would listen, he downplayed the impact Elijah's new club would have. But the truth was, Gerald felt the pressure more keenly than ever before. The exclusive aura that once enveloped Ironwood Ridge was fraying at the edges, and Gerald could feel control slipping through his fingers. He stood at his office window, looking out over the meticulously maintained golf course that had been Ironwood Ridge's pride for generations. Normally, the sight of the emerald greens and the towering oaks would calm his nerves, but today, even the familiarity of the view couldn't settle the unease churning inside him. His assistant knocked softly at the door before entering, holding a sleek tablet. "Mr. Hastings, the membership numbers for this month," she said, offering the device with a tight smile. Gerald took the tablet, his brow furrowing as he scanned the report. The numbers were worse than he had feared. Membership renewals were down, and more than a dozen members had formally resigned in the past month. A few had even cited Elysian Heights as their reason for leaving, specifically pointing to its modern, inclusive approach as something they felt aligned better with their values. "They'll regret it," Gerald muttered under his breath, more to himself than to his assistant. He tossed the tablet onto his desk, resisting the urge to smash it against the wall. He couldn't afford to lose his composure, not now. The assistant, sensing his frustration, hesitated before speaking again. "Sir, we've also received several inquiries from prospective members asking about any changes Ironwood Ridge might be making to reflect, well, the evolving social climate," she said carefully. "Some of them are wondering if we plan to follow the lead of places like Elysian Heights." Gerald's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what she meant. The evolving social climate was code for one thing: change. And change was the last thing he wanted for Ironwood Ridge. The club's exclusivity, its very identity, was rooted in tradition. To change meant compromising everything Ironwood Ridge stood for. "No," he said, his voice firm. "We won't be changing anything. Ironwood Ridge isn't a trend. It's an institution, and the people who understand that will remain loyal." His assistant nodded, though her eyes flickered with doubt before she left the office, closing the door softly behind her. Gerald sank into his leather chair, running a hand over his face. He had given that speech before, about loyalty, about tradition, but with each passing day it felt less convincing. The truth was, Elysian Heights had struck a nerve, and Ironwood Ridge was teetering on the edge of irrelevance. Across town, Elijah was sitting in a sun-drenched corner of his office, meeting with Carmen Rodriguez and the rest of his core team. They were putting the finishing touches on the agenda for the grand opening gala, a lavish event that was shaping up to be the social event of the year. "I can't believe we're this close," Carmen said, her voice filled with excitement as she flipped through the final schedule. "It feels like just yesterday we were walking around an empty field with a set of blueprints, and now we're hosting a gala in this incredible space." Elijah smiled, though his mind was already racing ahead, thinking about what was next for Elysian Heights after the grand opening. "It's only the beginning," he said. "Once the doors open, that's when the real work starts. We have to make sure we're not just a flash in the pan. I want to create something that lasts, something that changes the way people think about spaces like this." Carmen nodded. "We're already seeing that change happen. The media's talking about us as more than just a country club. They're calling us a model for the future. People are paying attention." Elijah's smile widened. He had always been someone who thrived on the bigger picture, on pushing boundaries and defying expectations. But as much as he relished the spotlight Elysian Heights was getting, he knew there was more at stake than just media buzz. This was about legacy, his legacy, and the legacy of everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. "There's one more thing we need to finalize," Elijah said, leaning forward. "The community outreach programs. I want to make sure that from day one, we're making an impact beyond these walls. This place isn't just for the members, it's for the city." Carmen nodded, pulling out a separate set of documents. "We've already established partnerships with local schools and organizations. I think starting with mentorship programs for young entrepreneurs and expanding into scholarships for underrepresented students is the way to go. We can host workshops and seminars here, bring in speakers, really make this a hub for learning and growth." Elijah's heart swelled with pride as he listened to Carmen outline the plans. Elysian Heights was exactly what he had dreamed it would be. A space that broke down barriers, not just for its members, but for the entire community. As they wrapped up the meeting, Elijah's assistant knocked on the door, poking her head in. "Mr. Walker, you've got a call from the mayor's office. They want to talk about the possibility of hosting a city-wide event at Elysian Heights next month." Elijah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Tell them I'll call back shortly," he said, exchanging a glance with Carmen, who grinned. "It looks like the city's already seeing us as more than just a club," she said. "This is big, Elijah. Hosting an event like that could solidify our place as a cornerstone of the community." Elijah nodded. "That's the plan," he said, though his mind was already spinning with possibilities. The mayor's office reaching out meant that Elysian Heights was on the radar in a way that Ironwood Ridge never had been. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about influence, about shaping the future of the city itself. While Elysian Heights surged ahead, Ironwood Ridge continued to falter. Gerald Hastings found himself in more meetings with his board than he had ever had in his entire tenure as president of the club. The tension was thick in every discussion, with the board members growing more restless and concerned as the months dragged on. "We need a plan," Robert Davis said for what felt like the 100th time. "We can't just sit here and hope things turn around. We need to act." Gerald's face remained impassive, but inside, he felt the weight of Robert's words. The problem was, he didn't have a plan. Everything he had built Ironwood Ridge around, tradition, exclusivity, prestige, was being challenged by Elysian Heights, and Gerald wasn't sure how to fight back. "I already told you," Gerald said, his voice tight. "We're not going to compromise who we are. Ironwood Ridge has stood for over a century. We're not going to change just because the social climate is shifting." "Gerald," Sarah Ellington said, her voice calm but firm, "times are changing whether we like it or not. We need to decide if we're going to evolve with them or if we're going to get left behind. We can't cling to the past forever." The room fell silent as the weight of her words hung in the air. Gerald knew she was right, but admitting that felt like admitting defeat. For so long, Ironwood Ridge had been the pinnacle of social status in the city, and now it felt like that was slipping away, one member at a time. As the meeting adjourned, Gerald lingered in his office, staring at the framed photos of past members that lined the walls. Men and women who had shaped the city, who had stood for everything Ironwood Ridge represented. But as he looked at their faces, he couldn't shake the feeling that their time had passed, and that his, too, was running out. Elijah, meanwhile, was preparing for the grand opening of Elysian Heights. The invitations had gone out, and the guest list was a who's who of the city's most influential figures. Business leaders, community activists, artists, and politicians, all were eager to see the culmination of Elijah's vision. As the final preparations were made, Elijah took a moment to walk through the now complete club. The glass walls reflected the sunset, casting a warm glow over the sleek, modern architecture. The sound of laughter and music from the staff setting up echoed through the halls. And for a moment, Elijah felt a deep sense of peace. The storm before the calm. The grand opening of Elysian Heights was less than a week away, and the city was abuzz with talk of the event. News outlets had dubbed it the social event of the year, and Elijah Walker's name was on everyone's lips. The city's power brokers and rising stars were all eagerly awaiting their chance to step into the exclusive new space that promised to reshape the social and cultural landscape. For Elijah, the days leading up to the event were a whirlwind of final preparations, interviews, and last-minute meetings. But beneath the excitement and flurry of activity, there was a simmering tension. Elysian Heights had become a symbol of change, but with that change came resistance. As Elijah sat in his office one evening, reviewing the final guest list for the gala, his assistant knocked on the door, her expression more serious than usual. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice low. "There's been some news. You might want to take a look." She handed him a tablet, the screen displaying an article from a local publication. The headline read, "Elysian Heights Under Fire. Controversy over club's inclusive policies stirs backlash among elites." Elijah's stomach tightened as he began to read. The article painted Elysian Heights in a controversial light, accusing it of undermining traditional values and suggesting that its focus on inclusivity was alienating the city's most established families. The tone was sharp, dripping with veiled disdain, and it was clear that the source of the criticism came from none other than the old guard, people like Gerald Hastings and the Ironwood Ridge elite. Elijah set the tablet down, his mind racing. He had expected some pushback, but this was a direct attack, and one that could potentially influence public opinion. For a brief moment, doubt crept into his thoughts. What if this backlash grew? What if it tarnished the launch of Elysian Heights before the doors had even opened? But then he remembered all the other times he'd been told that he didn't belong, that he wasn't good enough. The memory of his rejection from Ironwood Ridge flashed through his mind, reigniting the fire that had driven him to build Elysian Heights in the first place. This was just another hurdle, one that he would overcome. "We'll handle it," Elijah said, handing the tablet back to his assistant. "Call the PR team. I want a statement out by the end of the day." Meanwhile, across town at Ironwood Ridge, Gerald Hastings sat in a private dining room, flanked by several of the club's most influential members. The room, with its dark wood paneling and oil paintings of past presidents, felt like a relic of another era. Gerald had called the meeting to rally his allies, and from the determined looks on their faces, it was clear that they shared his concerns. "Elysian Heights is a threat," Gerald began, his voice calm but firm. "It's not just a new club. It's a challenge to everything we've built here at Ironwood Ridge, and we can't afford to sit idly by while they undermine us." Robert Davis, one of the club's oldest members and Gerald's closest confidant, nodded gravely. "They're selling themselves as the future, but what they're really doing is erasing the past. We've seen what happens when tradition is disregarded. It's a slippery slope." Gerald leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "Exactly. And that's why we need to act. We need to remind the city of what Ironwood Ridge stands for: prestige, tradition, exclusivity. Elysian Heights may have the attention now, but we've weathered storms before. We'll weather this one too." The men around the table murmured in agreement, but there was an undercurrent of unease. While Gerald spoke confidently, he couldn't ignore the reality that Ironwood Ridge was struggling. The membership numbers were still declining, and many of the city's younger, more progressive influencers were turning their attention to Elijah's club. It wasn't just a matter of waiting out the storm. This was a fight for survival. On the eve of the grand opening, Elijah stood at the entrance of Elysian Heights, watching as the final touches were put in place. The modern glass structure gleamed in the twilight, reflecting the city skyline. Inside, the event staff was busy setting up the ballroom for the gala, arranging flowers, setting tables, and fine-tuning the lighting to create the perfect atmosphere. Carmen Rodriguez, his trusted partner throughout the entire project, walked up beside him, holding a clipboard filled with last-minute details. "Everything's coming together," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "This place is going to blow people away tomorrow night." Elijah nodded, though his thoughts were elsewhere. "I read the article," he said, his voice steady, "and I'm not surprised by the backlash. But it's clear that we've touched a nerve." Carmen sighed, her expression hardening. "Yeah, I saw it too. It's pathetic, really. People clinging to outdated ideas just because they're afraid of losing their grip on power. But you know what? It doesn't matter. We've built something that people believe in. The community is behind us. Let them talk." Elijah smiled at Carmen's resolve. She was right. Elysian Heights wasn't just about him. It was about the city, about creating a space where everyone could feel they belonged. The gala tomorrow night would be their chance to show the world what they stood for. As they walked through the halls of the club, Elijah couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and anticipation. The journey to this moment had been long and difficult, filled with obstacles and challenges. But here he was, on the brink of something extraordinary. The next morning, as the city prepared for the grand opening, the tension between the old guard and the new was at its peak. At Ironwood Ridge, Gerald Hastings held yet another meeting with his board members, all of whom were increasingly anxious about the future of their club. The membership decline had accelerated in recent weeks, and rumors were swirling that several prominent families were planning to attend the Elysian Heights Gala instead of renewing their memberships at Ironwood Ridge. "We can't just sit here and watch this happen," one board member said, his voice rising in frustration. "We need to do something, make a statement, hold an event, something to remind people who we are." Gerald clenched his jaw, feeling the pressure mounting. "We'll respond," he said, "but we have to be careful. This isn't just about throwing a party to compete with theirs. It's about showing that Ironwood Ridge is still the premier club in this city, no matter what distractions pop up." Robert Davis, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward. "What if we invite Elijah Walker to join us here?" he suggested quietly. "I know it sounds drastic, but think about it. What better way to neutralize the threat than to bring him into our fold? If we offer him membership, it could send a message that we're open to change, but on our terms." The room fell silent, and Gerald stared at Robert in disbelief. The idea of offering Elijah Walker membership at Ironwood Ridge was unthinkable. It would mean admitting that Elijah's vision was the future, and that Ironwood Ridge had to bend to survive. "No," Gerald said firmly. "We won't offer him membership. This isn't about compromise. It's about standing firm." But as Gerald spoke, the doubt he had been suppressing for months crept back into his mind. What if Robert was right? What if the only way to save Ironwood Ridge was to adapt, to change? As the sun set on the day of the grand opening, the guests began to arrive at Elysian Heights. Limousines pulled up to the sleek entrance, and elegantly dressed attendees stepped onto the red carpet, greeted by the glow of cameras and the soft hum of conversation. The gala was a glittering spectacle, filled with the city's most influential figures, from politicians to artists, business leaders to community organizers. Inside, the ballroom was a sight to behold. Chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over the tables, and the sound of jazz filled the air. The guests mingled, sipping champagne and marveling at the club's design, a perfect blend of modern elegance and timeless luxury. Elijah stood at the center of it all, watching as the evening unfolded. He had worked tirelessly to bring this vision to life. And now, seeing it all come together, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Elysian Heights wasn't just a club. It was a movement, a testament to the power of resilience, determination, and inclusion. As he moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging smiles, Elijah noticed a familiar face standing near the entrance. Gerald Hastings had arrived, dressed in his finest suit, his expression unreadable. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. This was a moment he had imagined many times, facing Gerald not as the rejected outsider, but as the man who had built something greater. But as he approached, he realized that this wasn't about proving anything to Gerald. This was about showing that they could both exist in this city, that there was room for tradition and progress. "Gerald," Elijah said, extending his hand. "I'm glad you could make it." Gerald hesitated for a moment, then shook Elijah's hand. His grip was firm, but his eyes betrayed the turmoil within him. "Elijah," Gerald replied, his voice steady. "I wanted to see it for myself. You've done something remarkable here." Elijah smiled. "It's not just about me. It's about creating a space where everyone feels welcome." Gerald nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "I see that, and I respect what you've built, but Ironwood Ridge won't go down without a fight." Elijah chuckled softly, releasing Gerald's hand. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As the two men stood there, the weight of their shared history hung between them, but so did the possibility of something new, a future where their paths could coexist, where progress didn't mean the erasure of the past, but the evolution of it. With a final nod, Gerald turned and walked into the ballroom, disappearing into the crowd. Elijah watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, he felt a calm certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. And as the music swelled and the lights sparkled around him, Elijah knew that this was only the beginning. The fault lines of power. The morning after the Elysian Heights Gala, the city was still buzzing with the energy of the event. Photos of the dazzling evening flooded social media, with captions praising the elegance, diversity, and forward-thinking vision that Elijah Walker had brought to life. It was clear that Elysian Heights had made its mark, not just as an elite social club, but as a cultural movement. The shift in the city's social landscape was unmistakable, and many were eager to see what came next. However, as the sun rose over the city, the winds of change carried whispers of unease. Beneath the glamour and excitement of the previous night, tensions were brewing. Old power structures were starting to crack, and not everyone was prepared to face what was coming. In the quiet, manicured lawns of Ironwood Ridge, the atmosphere was tense. Gerald Hastings stood in his office, his back to the window, staring out at the sprawling golf course that had symbolized privilege and prestige for generations. The gala had been a stark reminder that times were changing, perhaps faster than he was willing to admit. Despite his polished demeanor the previous evening, a gnawing sense of dread had crept into his thoughts. The exclusivity of Ironwood Ridge had always been its strength, but now that same exclusivity felt like a noose tightening around the club's neck. Elysian Heights, with its focus on inclusivity, had tapped into something powerful, something that appealed to the city's younger, more diverse population. The opening night had drawn not just the wealthy and influential, but also artists, activists, and entrepreneurs. It was a melting pot of ambition and creativity, and it stood in stark contrast to the aging aristocracy of Ironwood Ridge. Gerald's phone buzzed on his desk, pulling him from his thoughts. He picked it up, seeing the name of his oldest friend and most trusted confidant, Robert Davis. "Robert," Gerald greeted, his voice steady but strained. "We need to talk, Gerald. I've been hearing things." Robert's voice crackled with urgency. "Some of the board members are losing confidence. They think we need to do something drastic to stay relevant, and I agree with them." Gerald sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "What do you suggest?" "We've already discussed this. We can't lower our standards just to compete with a club that doesn't understand tradition. That's the problem, Gerald. The world is changing, and we can't cling to the past forever. You saw what happened last night. The Elysian Heights is a force, and if we don't evolve, we'll be left behind." Gerald felt a flash of anger surge through him. "Evolve? By letting just anyone into our club? By turning Ironwood Ridge into a public park where anyone with a checkbook can stroll in? No, Robert. That's not what we stand for. We've survived for generations by maintaining our integrity. We can't just throw that away because of one flashy event." Robert's voice softened, but the resolve was still there. It's not about abandoning our values, Gerald. It's about survival. If we don't adapt, there won't be an Ironwood Ridge left to preserve. Think about it. Families are already talking about leaving, businesses are shifting their loyalties, and the younger generation sees us as relics. We need a new strategy. Gerald's jaw tightened. He hated how right Robert was, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. "I'll think about it," he said curtly before hanging up the phone. On the other side of town, Elijah Walker was sitting in the sunlit corner of a downtown cafe, sipping his morning coffee. The success of the gala still lingered in the air around him, but his mind was already focused on the next steps. He knew that the grand opening was only the beginning. Elysian Heights had made its mark, but now came the real work of sustaining its vision. Across from him sat Carmen Rodriguez, her sharp eyes scanning the morning paper, which featured an article praising the event. She set it down with a satisfied smile. "The reviews are in, and they're glowing. You've done it, Elijah. Elysian Heights is officially the hottest spot in town." Elijah chuckled, though he remained thoughtful. "It's a good start, but I know the old guard isn't going to sit back quietly. Gerald Hastings and Ironwood Ridge. They're not going to give up their power without a fight." Carmen nodded, her expression turning serious. "You're right. They've been the gatekeepers of this city for so long, they don't know how to function without being at the top. But the thing is, we're not just challenging them with a new club. We're challenging their entire way of thinking." "That's what I'm worried about," Elijah said, leaning back in his chair. "It's one thing to throw a successful event, but we're playing a long game here. Ironwood Ridge isn't just a place. It's an institution. It's ingrained in the city's identity, and dismantling that kind of power structure won't be easy." Carmen studied him for a moment. "But that's exactly why we're doing this, Elijah. Elysian Heights isn't just about offering an alternative. It's about building something better, something that reflects the future. You've always said this isn't just about you. It's about the community, about giving people a space where they belong, no matter where they come from." Elijah nodded slowly, his mind spinning with possibilities. "You're right. We need to keep pushing forward, keep showing people that there's a place for them here. But we also need to be strategic. If we let our guard down, people like Gerald will find a way to undermine us." Carmen's gaze hardened. "Let them try. We're ready." As the weeks passed, the tension between Elysian Heights and Ironwood Ridge continued to build. The city's social scene became a battleground of ideas, with each club representing two very different visions for the future. Elysian Heights hosted events that celebrated diversity, innovation, and inclusivity. Its doors were open to artists, activists, and entrepreneurs, creating a vibrant space where new ideas flourished. Ironwood Ridge, on the other hand, doubled down on its traditions, hosting exclusive dinners and galas that catered to the old money elite. But the cracks in Ironwood Ridge's foundation were becoming harder to ignore. Membership numbers were dropping faster than anticipated, and several prominent families had already defected to Elysian Heights. The younger generation, in particular, was drawn to Elijah's club, seeing it as a place where they could be themselves without the constraints of outdated expectations. Gerald Hastings felt the weight of these changes bearing down on him. Every day brought more bad news. A member resigning, a social event with low attendance, a whispered conversation about the club's future. The board meetings grew increasingly tense, with more voices calling for drastic action. Finally, Gerald could no longer ignore the reality of the situation. He called a meeting with Robert and the rest of the board, his voice heavy with resignation. "We've held out as long as we could," Gerald began, looking around the table at the faces of men who had stood by him for decades. "But it's clear that we can't keep going like this. Ironwood Ridge is bleeding members, and if we don't make changes, we won't survive." Robert, ever pragmatic, leaned forward. "What are you proposing, Gerald?" Gerald's eyes darkened. "We need to modernize. We need to attract the younger generation, make this place appealing to them again. That means loosening some of the restrictions, opening the doors a little wider." And I think we need to extend an olive branch to Elijah Walker. The room fell silent. The idea of reaching out to Elijah, the very man who had built the club that threatened their survival, was unthinkable to many of the men at the table. But as the silence stretched on, they all knew that Gerald was right. It was either adapt or die. A few days later, Elijah sat in his office at Elysian Heights when his assistant knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Walker, there's a visitor here to see you. It's Gerald Hastings." Elijah's brow furrowed in surprise. Gerald Hastings here, after everything that had transpired between them. "Send him in," Elijah said, standing to greet the man who had once represented everything that had stood in his way. Gerald walked in, his face stern but lacking the hostility that had once defined their interactions. He extended his hand, and Elijah shook it, the tension between them palpable. "Elijah," Gerald began, his voice steady but low, "I think it's time we talk." Elijah nodded, motioning for Gerald to sit. "I agree." As the two men sat across from each other, the air between them was thick with the weight of their shared history. They had once been adversaries, each representing a different vision for the city. But now, they sat on the edge of something new, an uncertain future where the lines of power were shifting and nothing was certain. But for Elijah, one thing was clear: whatever came next, he was ready.